good morning. And here we are again. It's Michael E. Gerber, the wandering Jew, and Rabbi Levi Cunin, the practicing Jew. And we're going to have a lively conversation because we're just through with Passover and we're on to the week. And tomorrow's Shabbat. And today is not. Rabbi Cunin, how are you?
Good morning, Rabbi Cole. Thank God. Good to hear you. Good to see you. Been 2 days off the grid. No phone, no news, no Facebook. Trying to guess from looking outside if the world has suddenly changed back to what we used to think was normal. Those were good, positive thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know. But thank God we're doing okay.
Good. Well, let me share with you a message I got yesterday, the day before. And it happened to be from a practicing Jew who wasn't offended by the title of our conversation, but questioned it seriously. Because he said that every shliach, every rabbi, is a wandering Jew. And every wandering Jew is a practicing Jew. So the whole title is off the point. So he wasn't offended by it, but he took offense at it because he realized that in accordance with the Rebbe's teaching and continuous reminder that if anybody came to him and said, I want to apologize because I don't read Torah, I don't practice Judaism, the Rebbe stopped him and called in his tracks, and he said, every Jew is a practicing Jew. Every practicing Jew is a wandering Jew. And so I thought we'd bring that conversation here to begin our conversation anew. From one wandering Jew to the other wandering Jew. I'm raising the question for you.
Well, I will say that it certainly goes along the lines of 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
I'm sorry?
2 Jews, 3 opinions. And, of course, when we go to the deeper conversation of that point, yes, I agree. We're all wandering and we're all practicing. And any Jew who's living today is really a miracle, considering all of the incredible challenges that our people have gone through over the last thousands of years. And yes, I recall that when people would come by the Rebbe and say about a certain Jew that they're very far from Judaism, the Rebbe would stop them at that time and yes, correct. But the reality is that over the last hundreds of years, so much has happened to our people. So many of our people have opted to not practice Judaism. I'm not talking about in our generation because I look at the people who don't practice, who are Jews that don't practice in our generation, or the people who practice in our generation are simply a product of that which occurred many, many years before we came around. So I hear you. We could change the title.
No. I'm not interested in changing the title. I'm interested in having a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Because to me, while what he said, I completely and immediately understood. In that understanding, I know the difference between a practicing Jew and a wandering Jew. I know the difference between one who studies Torah, one who practices the rituals of Judaism as brought down to us over the centuries, and those who don't. And so the difference to me is distinct. And because the difference is distinct, and because I've never questioned the fact of whether I am a Jew, I've always said I am a Jew, but I've never acted as a Jew, as prescribed by I'll call them rituals of being a Jew. So to me, that's the major distinction. There are those who are Jews who have disconnected themselves with the name Jew and have simply become what I think of as secular Jews, not wandering Jews. And to me, there's a great difference between a secular Jew and a wandering Jew. A wandering Jew feels the spirit of Judaism, but in one respect feels disconnected from God. In that I don't doubt the existence of God, using the word existence in relationship to how you would think of the word existence. But I simply doubt, I'll call the ritual, which I've brought here in the conversation, which essentially is that in relationship to Hasidic Judaism and the Baal Shem Tov and Tanya and the I'll call rituals, they appear to me to be the creation of man as opposed to the creation of God. It's man's interpretation of what has been presumably brought to them, us, by Moses on Mount Sinai, and so forth. So the difficulty is, and therein lies the difficulty in this conversation, that you regard, I'm saying, you're going to correct me, I'm sure, you regard all of these matters as history. The Red Sea parted, and so forth, as history, and I regard them as a story. So I have always regarded them as a story. And given my experience with the rabbis that I grew up with, I regarded them as tellers of a story, not revealers of a truth. And for whatever reason, I didn't trust the story they were telling me. So my skepticism was born very early, evidently, in my life. And while I went through, I'll call it the ritual of bar mitzvah, by the time I was bar mitzvahed, and I have a picture of my celebration of my bar mitzvah to my right, with my mother and my father and my bar mitzvah cake and my little talits and my smiling face. To me, it was just a ritual. In fact, preparation for Torah was simply a job I had to do. And I'm sharing this with you, Levi, given the conversation that I just had with one of your brothers, Shlochim, that I deeply felt his sincerity and the relationship he had with the term wandering Jew and practicing Jew, which were completely the same to him, despite the fact I wasn't practicing, and he said I was. And despite the fact that you're not wandering, and he said you are, otherwise you're not a Jew, and so forth and so forth and so on. So since we're here for only 20 minutes and I've already taken up a good portion of it, please respond.
So when we grew up in this beautiful country, hearing the story that there was a fellow named Columbus and he discovered America. And I'll just tell you that there's more proof of the story of Yiddishkeit, of Torah being true, than the story of Columbus discovering America. But understand some important premises of our universe, which then will lend itself to understand why it is that we doubt so much. The Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of Judaism, share with us a fascinating fact that our world is referred to as the world of lies.
The world of lies.
Of lies. It's the dominant force of humanity is non-truths. I think today we're experiencing that with the outbreak of the virus and all of the non-truths that are coming about from that in terms of its origin. China just, for example, announcing an additional 40% hike in the deaths that they originally announced as an example. Or take a look at what goes on in the UN and that horrible organization that continuously harasses Israel and speaks lies of it, and the countries from around the world sit back and support those lies. How is it that a little small country like Israel should be the target of most of the declarations of the world organization called the United Nations? But when you put it into context that the predominant energy of humanity at this time is the fact that it's a world of lies, it makes sense why we would doubt a story to be truth. Now, there's a reason for that, and it's not just because. There's a purpose to that, and it's not just because, and we're part of that purpose. And our journey as human beings, and specifically as Jewish people, is to be able to sift through the non-truths and to discover the beautiful gems of truth if we choose to, if we give it the attention that it requires for us to be able to realize and recognize it as a truth. I have a story I want to share with you about my father. Many years ago, he used to go to a camp here in California where there were students that came from secular Jewish homes, and they would come to this camp and they would spend time with each other. But just because they were Jewish didn't necessarily mean that they had beliefs as they came from secular Jewish homes. Many of them were brought up with beliefs that were very different from the ones that I was brought up with. And my father, I recall him telling us the story that one time they used to have different sessions where my father would come and the children would gather around and he would tell them stories, etc., and share with them. And of course, they would have a lot of questions and he would do his best to answer them. And there was one teenager there that was brutal in his response and was brutal to my father about anything that he was saying. My father said black, he would say white. If my father said white, he would say black. And his resistance to anything about Yiddishkeit was so strong. And then on Saturday, my father had a custom to teach a song to the kids. And he shared with them a song that comes from a couple of 100 years ago, where the song talks about a child who gets lost in the forest and he's looking for his father and his father's looking for him. I hear in the forest a cry and a shout. A father seeks his children who wandered out. Ah, ma 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 ma. Ah, ma ma. Ah, ma 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 ma. Children, children, where can you be that you no longer remember me? And it goes on. And as my father was singing that song, that one student got up, burst out crying, and ran out of the room. And my father was quick to finish lunch to find out what had happened to that boy, why he had gotten so emotional. My father finally caught up with him, and he was still crying. And when he could finally gather himself together, he told my father that when he was a small child, his Zaidi, who was an observant Jew, would have his own little pot for kosher while the rest of the family was not. He would keep the Sabbath while the rest of the family did not. He said, I loved my Zaidi so much. And he said, when I was 7 years old, my Zaidi brought me on his lap and he sang me a song. And after he finished the song, he said, my child, in Yiddish, he said, remember the song. It's going to come to use to you one day. He said, after that, a few hours later, his Zaidi passed away. His grandfather passed away. He said, for years, I've been looking for and trying to find what that song was that he sang to me. I went through different Yiddish albums to try to see if I would find it. It was so beautiful. I wanted to remember it. He said, today is the first time I heard that song since my Zaidi passed away. I share that story with you because here you have someone who in his one state of being was so resistant and so reluctant to have any conversation about Yiddishkeit and its truth. And yet, at that moment, something within him, his neshama, his soul got awakened. His soul that never left him, that was always with him. But it got a nudge from a song that spoke to his heart, that spoke to his memories, that reconnected him to his Zaidi. And his path at that time changed. Today, that person that lives in Israel with his wonderful family, grandkids by now. And I share that because in that context, absolutely, every one of us has it within us. It's something that lives within us. It's a conversation that is spoken of in mysticism, that despite the fact that a Jew could live for 70 or 80 years, apparently disconnected from his Yiddishkeit. But the truth is, it's alive, it's powerful, and it's there. It's just like a diamond that regardless of how much is covering it up, the diamond is always there and its beauty never leaves. And the same is also true about the neshama, about the soul, of even the person who today may say that this is all nonsense and this is all meaningless. But if they are indeed a yid, and if they are indeed have that neshama, then that soul is within them by inheritance from our great forefathers and our mothers, Abraham and Sarah, etc., that was given to us as an inheritance and lives within us. And it does shine every once in a while on its own, a moment of inspiration, a moment of connectivity. Our job is to uncover it. Our job is to discover it. And our job is to allow it to shine. But if you're a yid, it's alive and well within you. It's there. It just needs to be uncovered.
So thank you for that, Levi.